Okay. If you just have look at what I was saying yesterday, look at sheet 1, and you've got there the introduction, doctrine, causes, remedies, and conclusion. Okay, now this chart in blue is doctrine, causes, and remedies. And what this chart in blue shows is that everything comes back to this. Everything comes back to that because remedies for what? Remedies for the problem laid out in doctrine. Causes of what? Causes of what's laid out in doctrine. What is the doctrine? The doctrine is philosopher, believer, theologian, historian, apologetics, reformer, and a conclusion. And again, the philosopher comes first because the philosophy is the problem for the believer. The modernist believer comes back to the philosophy. Modernist theologian comes back to the philosopher. Historian, apologist, every modernist is based on the philosophy. The philosophy is the core of the problem. You look at the section on the second of the black and white sheets, Pascendi II, heart of the matter. You see the philosopher, the believer, and the theologian. That's all you see on sheet 2, because that's the most important. And then if you look at the philosopher, because he is the most important, you see he divides into principles and application. Application of what? Application of the principles. So the principles is where it's really at. The principles you see negative and positive. Again, the negative is like clearing the building site, and the positive is building something. So before you build, you need to clear the building site. Therefore, the negative principles are the heart of the whole encyclical. And once you can grasp what's going on here, you grasp the rest of the encyclical. But to grasp what's going on here is unfortunately difficult because it's the problem of knowledge. And the question of knowledge is complicated in human beings. It took the Greek philosophers quite a while to sort it out, because it's human knowledge. One moment, let's have a look. You've got 6 beings. So this is where we're at now. 6, you've got Almighty God. You've got the angel. Oh, no, sorry, I need to put that in the middle. You've got Almighty God. You've got the angels, you've got men, you've got animals, you've got vegetable and mineral. Those are 6 levels of beings. Of course, Almighty God is a class in his own, but nevertheless, he is where we all come from. Now then, God, angels, and men are all spiritual. Men, animal, vegetable, and mineral are all material. That means that you've got only one being who is both spiritual and material. God and the angels are spiritual without being material. Animal, vegetable, and mineral are material without being spiritual. Only man, amongst all the material beings, only man has a spiritual soul. Therefore, man is the most complicated of all creatures, because he's both spiritual and material. Therefore, the loving of man is complicated, and the knowing of man, the activity of knowing, how man knows, is complicated, because it's both spiritual and material. Okay, we come next to, given that man is complicated, we have, this then is basic. Well, let's turn now, deal out Kita Pascendi, please. I hope there are enough. If there aren't enough, you'll have to share. Man, so look at the central column, and so to speak, fold the other 2 away, so to speak. You don't have to, but it's too narrow. But look at the central column. Man's process of knowing. You see, firstly, a pen man with a very big head. And around the outside, you've got sensible phenomena. Sensible does not mean here what it usually means, in other words, reasonable. It means here capable of being sensed. For instance, this little book is capable of being sensed. I see the black, that's sensing, and I feel with my fingers that's touching. So I've got two streams of sense data coming to through my fingers, the touch, to my eyes, the black. So this little book is then sensible in the sense that it's capable of being sensed. Like intelligible is something that's capable of being intelliged. Reasonable is something that's capable of being reasoned. Touchable is something that can be touched. Sensible is something that can be sensed. So beware of that word. It's not its usual meaning. So the sensible phenomena. Phenomena is simply the Greek word for appearances. So the sense appearances. So if I tried licking this little book, I will get a taste of it. If I try smelling it, I will get whatever smell there may be. Those are all the sense data. So the sense phenomena are, so to speak, on the outside of the thing. But then there's something more than that. Just like yesterday, you had the diagram of the 8 straight lines plus a number of squiggles. The lines and the squiggles were visible to the eye. They were sensible. They were sense phenomena. But there was something more. What more was there? What more there was what the mind picked up. The mind picked up. When I said to you, it's a giraffe walking past a window, the mind clicked. You recognize the moment when the mind clicked. The mind was puzzled. I don't know what this is. This is strange. He's nuts. But then when you said giraffe walking past the window, click, dum. There we are. There it was. So you see the sense lines. Everybody saw the eight straight lines. Everybody saw the squiggles. The eyes were picking up that. But then if I asked myself, what is it? I didn't know. Then somebody says, it's a giraffe walking past the window. Yes, that's what it is. That was the mind clicking in. And the mind is different from the senses. The mind is something more than the senses. The difficulty of separating the two and realizing that there are two processes going on. The mind, the sense is picking up the sense data, and the mind clicking onto what the thing is. To realize that there are two processes, you have to think about it, because all day long we are using both processes completely integrated, one with another. All of us had breakfast. Every one of us tried drinking what was drinkable and eating what was eatable. Nobody tried to eat what was drinkable or to drink what was eatable, because the mind was constantly clicking in, this is food and this is drink. The mind was steadily interpreting what my senses were telling me. And if my mind did not interpret what the senses were telling me, I'd be in trouble. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. Just the same, when I leave this room, I'm going to go out through the door. I'm not going to go to try to walk through a bookshelf, obviously. So when we're talking about the mind and the senses working together, it's happening all day long without our thinking about it. We've done it since we were little children. In fact, notice how little children are constantly, for them, all the sense data are new, which is why the little child is constantly saying to mummy, "Mummy, what's that? Mummy, what's that? Mummy, what's that?" The little mind of the little child is clicking onto, or wants to click onto, what these things are. His mind wants to know what's behind the phenomenon, what's behind the appearances, so to speak. What is behind the appearances is the whatness, what it is, the whatness of the thing. Or its essence is another word, connected with the Latin word for to be. Or its substance, that's another word for it. So the mind is picking up what these things are through the senses. Okay, now let's have a look. The sense phenomena. Man's knowing the sense phenomena. There's the sense phenomena, there's the 8 lines and the squiggles. But there's something more, and what is more is the giraffe walking past the window. The one is for the senses and the other is for the mind. What you've got is the material object. What the senses pick up is the material object. The sensation corresponds to matter plus something more than just material. I don't yet know what it is, and I don't know how the mind picks it up. So, but I do know that my mind picks up something more than what's there. Okay, keep going down. The senses, in blue, the senses perceive the sensible phenomena of the object, and you've got the hyphen in the middle of the word to show that it's not being used in the usual way of the word, but in the sense of capable of being sensed. The senses pick up the sensible appearances of the object, and they deliver a sense packet to the mind. So the senses, for instance, the senses, there's a stream coming in of what I see, there's a stream coming in of what I hear, there's a stream coming in of what I smell, at this moment not very much, a faint odor of the fire. There's a sense of smell, there's a sense of touch. I touch the bench beneath my backside, I touch the table in front of me, whatever I touch, and then there's the last whatever I taste. I'm not tasting at the moment, I was tasting at breakfast, I'm not tasting now. So the senses are constantly feeding, the 5 outer senses are feeding me. Notice next that there are actually inner senses. For instance, there has to be a sense, this is Aristotle, these are the great Greek philosophers who worked out these things. And it took some working out. There has to be an internal sense which is acting like a telephone exchange to coordinate the 5 streams of sense data coming in. For instance, my eyes and yours can't hear, my ears and yours can't see. How then do I know that how do I put together the sense the ear data with the eyes data, so that I know that it's the same object that I'm seeing and hearing? Answer, because there's an inner sense which acts like a telephone exchange and coordinates the 5 streams coming in. Some of the streams, of course, are some of the time inactive, but when the streams are all active, it needs a coordinator to put them together. So Aristotle says there's a sense which is common inside, which coordinates a sense coordinator. For instance, in other words, human knowledge is quite complicated, and so there's a sense coordinator inside. For instance, okay, then the inner sense coordinator delivers a packet of appearances, a coordinated packet of appearances, to where? Okay, then the mind, which is the same thing as the intellect, confronts this packet. The packet is delivered to the mind. What does the mind do? And again, it's complicated. But before we get the complications, the intellect then gets to work on the sense packet. That's another line down. And then you've got another little box which is entitled a comparison. The comparison is this. Imagine a box with a precious jewel inside. The box is locked. There's a precious jewel. It's in the possession of a slave. The slave holds the box with the jewel inside. The slave cannot get at the jewel because he hasn't got the key to the box. But the slave takes the box with the jewel to the queen. And the queen has a key. The queen unlocks the box and gets at the jewel which is inside. The slave was carrying the box, but he couldn't get inside. It's the queen who could get inside. Okay. The slave is the senses, the 5 senses. The box is the packet of sensations. Inside the box is the whatness, or the essence or the substance of the thing. The slave, the senses can't get at that. My eyes and ears don't actually get to the giraffe. All my eyes get to is lines and squiggles, if I think about it. The eyes only get to the lines and squiggles. It's the mind that reads what that is. So, the slave delivers the box to the queen. The queen is the mind, and she unlocks the box and gets at the jewel, which is the whatness. So you got it there. The jewel is the intelligible form, or the the form which the mind can grasp, the mind which the intellect can get at, the form of the thing that the mind can get at. The box is the sense packet, the packet of sensations. The slave is the senses, and the queen is the intellect. So, the senses get hold of the sensation, the sensible sensation, and the senses carry that to the mind. All the time, your sense phenomena, all of you have sense phenomena, so do I. All of us have sense, all of us make sense phenomena all the time for other people to sense, although I can sense myself to some extent. The sense phenomena are being delivered by the senses to the mind. And the mind, confronted with the sense packet, is capable of unlocking the sense packet and pulling out the intelligible form, which the senses couldn't get at. The senses delivered it, but they couldn't get at it. So the sensation carries the intelligible essence of the thing, what it is, the intelligible whatness, to the intellect. Now the intellect then Aristotle says that there are two faculties. There's an active faculty and a passive faculty, or an active intellect and a passive intellect. And think then of a crane and a truck, or a lorry. The crane of the mind gets down, picks out the intelligible form from the sense packet, swings it over and drops it into the passive intellect, and the passive intellect actually intelliges, does the understanding of what the thing is. The passive mind knows what the thing is. All the time, your intellect, your mind and my mind are working on the display, the tremendous non-stop display of sensations which come to us. And all the time, your mind and mine are working automatically intelliging, picking the whatness of things out of the sense packet that's coming to them. It's a little complicated, but in order to get the thing right, the correct explanation has to be complicated. And what the modernists do is they monkey with that complicated mechanism. If it's complicated, it's capable of being messed with. Recently, you may remember, a few years ago, there was an American destroyer which went quite close to the Crimea. And the Russians said, keep off, keep away. And the Russians flew, you may remember, what was the name? Derek Cook, I think was the name of the ship.
Thomas Cook?
Derek Cook, I think Derek Cook. Anyway, some American hero. And the Russians flew past, and all the electronics on the American ship just went dead. After that experience, 27 of the American sailors resigned from the Navy. They resigned from the American Navy because the American Navy looks like it can't defend itself from the Russians. It's perfectly possible. And afterwards, a Russian scientist commented, the more complicated something is, the more complicated electronics are, the more easy they are to mess around with. So it's a human, and the Russians were content with that. The Russians didn't attack the ship, they didn't bomb it, otherwise they left it alone. But they demonstrated that the Americans had better watch out, because the Russians are capable of killing their electronics. The Americans are very proud of their electronics. I think they had a system called Aegean or Arctic, or a name like that, some special new system of electronics. And the Russians apparently could kill it dead just like that. So the Americans had better watch out. Anyway, so the Russians gave them a warning, but they didn't start the Third World War. And the American sailors resigned. The more complicated something is, the more easy it is to interfere with. Human knowledge is complicated, therefore it's easy to mess around with. And what the modernists do is they mess around with the process of knowing. Okay, then turn now to Aristotle. The Aristotelian sense is in green. We come down, we're going to read down the left-hand column. The realistic analysis of the mysterious combination in man of intellection and sensation. Then you've got the Aristotelian man over left with a little halo above his head. Whereas, look, just flash over to the Kantian man and you've got two little horns on his head. You do well to laugh. You do well to laugh. Congratulations if you laughed. Then, what you've got opposite the Aristotelian man, you've got the mind inside. Whatever is more than matter is here coloured orange. What is more than matter is the form of a thing, actually the form of a thing. We can't go into that because it's another whole story, but Aristotle has got, corresponding to his analysis of knowledge, is his analysis of things. And he analyzes that material things are combined of form and matter. Form and matter. The form is what forms the matter to be what it is. The matter is the element that makes things material, but that isn't in itself anything. Matter, you can't imagine matter. You can't get a picture in your mind of matter. But if you think of a great big blob, that's the nearest we can get. You see how our minds have to function in material pictures. You get a material picture of something, then you begin to understand it. So matter, in any case, is what makes material things material. It's absent in God and the angels. It's completely absent in God and the angels, but it's present from man through animal, vegetable, mineral. Material is what makes things material. But it's characterless, completely characterless, or completely formless in itself. What makes the matter of this to be a little book is the form of the book. What makes the matter of this to be paper is the form of paper. This is an A4 sheet. So that's its form. And then there's some matter. But if I burn it, if I burn the sheet, the form of the sheet completely disappears and the form of cinders or ashes takes over. But you can't say that there's creation and annihilation. There's obviously something common to both ends of the change. And that what is common is formless. It needs one form at one end of the change, another form at the other end of the change, but the two forms share the same matter. So there's something, when a material change happens, there is something that's common to both ends of the change, which is formless. It's formed with one form at the beginning of the change, it's formed with another form at the end of the change. That is matter. Therefore, material things are composed of form and matter, and form is what makes the thing what it is. The form gives to the thing its whatness. So the form is in blue, and the form is not material. The matter is material, of course. The form is not material. Therefore, it's the form of the thing that the senses can't pick up and don't pick up. They simply pick up the sense appearances. And everything material will have sense appearances or sense phenomena. So the sensation corresponds to the material appearances. The intellection corresponds to the intelligible form of the thing. And the thing is combined of an intelligible form and a non-intelligible matter. Matter is not intelligible. So things are composed of form and matter, and to that corresponds the mind picking up the form and the senses picking up the matter, picking up the material phenomena, the appearances of the material, of the matter. So in the material object, colored black, is what it is by its immaterial form. And so the material is colored black, the immaterial form is colored orange, which is informing the matter and composing the object, putting together the object. The form and the matter together put together the object. The senses receive passively whatever is sensible of the material object. Passible means passively, without acting on it. So the senses, there's a sunlit surface of the building outside. My eyes don't make that sunlit. My eyes don't make that white yellow with a red tin roof. My eyes don't make that. My eyes receive that. That's why you see in the picture black arrows coming from the sense phenomena to the eye of Frankenstein. Let's call him Frankenstein. So the eyes, in this respect, the object is active and the sense object is active and the senses are passive, which is why I sense things as they are. I'm all the time sensing. If you go into a modern university and begin to learn philosophy in a modern university, do you know the first thing they will do to you? Poor little students. You think your senses are reliable, don't you? Yes, Professor. Well, I'm telling you they aren't. Oh, Professor. For instance, have you ever tried putting a stick in a swimming pool and you saw the stick suddenly went crooked? Yes, Professor. Well, you know perfectly well. You pulled the stick out and it wasn't crooked at all, was it? Yes, Professor. So when your eyes were deceiving you, weren't they? Yes, Professor. And then sometimes you've had a nightmare, haven't you? Yes, Professor. And a big bear was about to eat you. Yes, Professor. So your senses were deceiving you, weren't they? Yes, Professor. So we're going to forget about senses, all right? We're going to make our own philosophy. We're not going to care about common sense. Bah! Common sense. Bah! And the professor mocks common sense. And the poor student, so I can't rely on my senses. He relies on them all day long. The professor relies on them all day long. When the professor gets out of bed and he comes downstairs and his wife has made him with some warm black liquid, he knows that's coffee. He smells it to check, and he relies on his senses all day long. It's only when he's in the university, teaching philosophy in the university, that he begins to spout nonsense. And not only nonsense, but nonsense that rots the guts of these poor students, that rots the mind of these poor students. And the poor students, when they went to philosophy, went to university, they said to themselves, oh, I'm going to study philosophy because philosophy is the deepest and most interesting of the subjects in the university. That's quite true. It should be. It ought to be. If it's true, it's the most precious of all the subjects, that's for certain. But if it's nonsense like modern philosophy is, the students are going to be fed a stone instead of bread. They're going to get stones instead of bread. They came to the philosophy department in the hope for bread, and all they're given is stones. The philosophy sections of modern universities all follow Kant. None of them follow St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas is true. Kant is profoundly false, wretchedly false, corruptedly false, nauseatingly false. Any healthy mind vomits Kant, if you can understand him. Kant is trash, junk, poison. And he is the king of the philosophy of all the modern universities. That's where we're at. And that's why the youth today are in such a mess. Because they're fed stones instead of bread. They're not learning Thomas Aquinas anywhere. They're not given the Catholic faith. They're turned away from the faith. In the schools, it's forbidden to speak to them of God. No teacher is allowed to speak in the schools of God. That's certainly the case in some, it's very likely the case in over here in Europe, certainly in the United States. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. The only thing that God can do with this present state of civilization is wash it out and start again, or burn it out. Because when he had to wash it out once with Noah, the time of Noah, and we've reached the same stage. We're only worse because they were pre-Christian pagans, and now today we're post-Christian pagans, which is much worse. Therefore, God is going to have to burn it out. He promised at the time of Noah, you read it in the scripture, he promised that he wouldn't wash out humanity again. He promised that the day would follow day, day and night would continue, the sun, and so on and so on, all that would continue. He wouldn't again excuse me the expression, Lord, he wouldn't again interrupt those processes, that normal process of nature. But he never said he wouldn't burn it out with fire. And in 1973 in Japan, Our Lady said there's going to be a rain of fire, R-A-I-N, like a rain, instead of a rain of water, a rain of fire. That's all that modern humanity is fit for. It's terrible. That's what's going to straighten out this mess that we've got today. And nothing less is going to straighten it out. So this, because an interesting thing that St. Thomas Aquinas says in the Summa Theologia, people who mess around with basic morals like heterosexuality and homosexuality, people who mess around with basic morals are just like people messing around with the principles of the mind. So if you he uses messing around with the mind as a measure of gravity. And only messing around with the mind is comparable to messing around with morals, to basic morals, like heterosexuality and homosexuality. Therefore, you can turn that around. Homosexuality is a measure of the gravity of messing around with the mind, of teaching falsehoods about how the mind works, teaching falsehoods about the basics of the mind. Kant was immediately followed by Hegel, who said a thing is and a thing can be and not be at the same time. That's messing around with the basic principle of human thinking. The basic principle of human thinking is the law of non-contradiction. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time. That's common sense. A cat cannot be a cat and a dog at the same time. Either it's a cat or it's a dog. But, oh no, your modern professor of philosophy, oh, a cat. Of course it can be a dog. It's evolving into a dog all the time. You see where evolution comes in? All things are evolving. All things are in constant evolution. Nonsense. Things are what they are. They're not what they're evolving. They do change, but when they change from what they were to what they will be, but they aren't they aren't different things at the same time. A thing can be I can be ignorant of Chinese and then I can learn Chinese, but when I'm ignorant of Chinese, I don't know it, and when I know it, I don't unknow it. I'm not ignorant of it. So a thing can. Modern philosophy teaches nonsense, and it's very grave, and that's why the students are faggots. And they're all as they've undone the principles of the mind, so they've undone principles of morals. You teach false philosophy in these universities, and it's inevitable that the kids are going to be lost, or faggots. Why not? Sexuality is not for children, sexuality is for pleasure. I get just as much pleasure out of a boy out of a girl, or girl out of a girl as out of a boy. That's where we're at. Horrendous. Now then, the sense packet comes to the mind. The agent intellect, that's the crane. The intellect is two. It's a crane and a truck, or a lorry. The agent intellect opens the sense packet, delivered to it by the senses. So you've got the agent intellect, like the queen unlocks the box and gets to the jewel. The agent intellect opens the sensation packet and gets to the intelligible essence, the whatness. The agent intellect intelligibilizes and abstracts the object's intelligible form. So the action of intelligibilizing, it renders the whatness, it makes the whatness graspable by the mind. As long as the whatness is locked into matter, it's unintelligible, because the matter is unintelligible because it has no form. So the form has to be abstracted or extracted. Abstracted. The agent intellect, the crane, has to pick the intelligible essence out of the object, swing it over and drop it into the truck, the waiting truck of the passive intellect. And the passive intellect, so we go on. The agent intellect delivers to the passive intellect the intelligibilized form, the form which the agent intellect, has just intelligibilized, rendered intelligible. Until then it was unintelligible. It had to be intelligibilized by the agent intellect. Let's just say it's a crane which throws light upon the object, a light that wasn't, like cranes often do. Cranes have a light to illuminate what they're picking up. So the agent intellect illuminates, intelligibilizes the intelligible form, picks it, abstracts it from the matter, so that it is then intelligible, and then drops it into the waiting passive intellect, the truck. The passive intellect then intelliges. So the action of the agent intellect is active, and the action of the passive intellect is passive. And both are needed. You need a crane and a truck. The crane without a truck is going to sit there hanging with whatever it is, and there's no truck. The crane just hangs onto it, waiting for a truck. The truck is waiting for the crane to deliver something. If there's no crane, if there's a truck waiting and no crane, there's going to be no delivery. So there has to be crane and truck. There has to be active intellect and passive intellect. But the difference is very important. Because the intellect that intelliges, that understands, that knows the object is passive. An agent intellect was necessary, but the passive intellect is not agent. It's passive. In other words, the agent intellect is also like the matter in a way. It's a blob waiting for the intelligible form to be dropped into it, and then it comes to life. So the passive intellect is waiting for the form. Therefore, in St. Thomas, the only thing that we know, that the mind knows, is the form of the object itself, which means, of course, we know the object. We are not incapable of knowing the object. We are capable of knowing the object. It's a complicated mechanism with all the senses, the sense packet, the crane, the truck, the lorry, you name it all. But in the end, the passive intellect is passive. My eye doesn't tell the barn that it's red and yellow. It's the barn that tells my eyes that it's red and yellow. The intelligible form is not told what it is by my mind. That's lunacy. That's lunacy. But it's the object itself that tells my mind what it is. So my mind is knowing the object. And in fact, in Thomas Aquinas, the mind is a pure potency or a pure capacity. It's waiting for the form of some sense object to be dropped into it by the crane to come to life. The mind only knows. So what have we got? We've got the intelligible form and the intelligibilizing and intelliging mind. So the form is matter, is composed of matter and form. The mind is the act and potency. Potency meaning passiveness. So the very act of what you can think of the mind like that famous picture of Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel. You may remember Almighty God reaching down with his finger and Adam waiting for God to zap him, and then he'll come to life and he'll be created. You all of you know the famous picture? So the mind is like Adam. He's waiting for the form of the intelligible object suddenly to bring him to life. In other words, in Thomas, the only act of the mind is what the form is, the whatness of the material thing. In other words, the idea that the mind does not know the thing is, in Thomas, completely ridiculous. In common sense and in 24-hour, 7/24 life, it's completely ridiculous that I don't know what things are. Of course I do. If I've eaten too much green cheese at night, or if I've drunk a few too many Guinnesses, well, then of course the mind gets a bit groggy. But in any normal waking state, of course the mind knows what things are. Well, guess what Kant says? The mind can't know what things are. Imagine that. It's a hydrogen bomb in philosophy. The mind can't know things as they are. Whew. Let's have a look at Kant. Kantian nonsense is the false conciliation of sense skepticism of Hume with the intellectual certainty of the science of Newton. Two Brits, a Scot and an Anglo. Both 18th century, and Kant is 18th century. Kant was born by 1732, died 1804, I think. Aristotle was in the 300s before Christ, 388 to 352, something like that. So Aristotle was before Christ. He didn't even have the benefit of the church. But he was healthy. He was a healthy... Only the modern world is so rotten as Kant. Only the modern world has gone so rotten because the incarnation, Christ came and raised human living, human, everything human was raised high up by the Catholic Church to the Middle Ages, but then men got fed up with God being number one, and man wanted to be number one, and so from the Middle Ages it's been a non-stop decline, with occasional good, I was saying yesterday, with occasional good counterattacks. But basically, mankind is wanting to get rid of God. That's what's going on today, and that's the real problem of today. So, the false Hume said, and this is the Brits are not good at philosophy, nor are the Germans. The best are those who are closest to the Latins. The best language for philosophy, modern language, is probably Spanish or Italian, maybe French. Those three Latin languages. Latin is very good for philosophy. It's clear. But modern languages are not so good. German is dreadful. English is only a little bit better. That's the way I see it anyway. We've got no word for to intellige. All we've got is understand or know. That's all we've got, understand and know. It's very inadequate. Whereas in German, in Latin, you've got three words. Cognosco, which is the general word for to know. Intelligere, the knowing of the mind. And sentire, the knowing of the senses. Three words. In English, only two, and both of them are muddy. They're not clear like the Latin words. There is, so now we're looking at, so notice notice in Aristotle, both the material black arrows go from the object to Frankenstein, and the intelligible arrow goes from the form to the mind, which is saying that both the intellection and the sensation of human beings is objective. The objective informs the senses, and the object informs the mind. Okay, now in Kant, you will notice that just take a glance at the picture. The arrow, the sensation arrows in black go from the object to Kant, but the mind arrows go from the mind to the object, with a question mark inside the object. In other words, the mind in Kant doesn't know what the object is. What the object is called in German the Ding an sich, the thing in itself. And for Kant, that's unknowable. So this coat could be a tortoise, because my mind makes what it is. It's not the thing that tells me what it is. It's I who tell the thing what it is. The black phenomena come to me from the coat. That Kant allows. So he's objective as to the sensation, but he's subjective as to the intellection. The intellect of the subject, that's me, tells the object what it is. It's no longer the object telling me what it is. It's me telling the object what it is, even though the sensations still come in Kant from the object. But what's inside that is a question mark, and it's my mind that fills it in. So I am the creator. So I am God. In Kant, I am God. The subject is God. The error is in one word called subjectivism. It's the replacing of the replacing of objective intellection by subjective intellection. Objective intellection is impossible. Let's have a look. There is a material sensible object. This is in green. What's in green is true in Kant. What's red is not true. There is a material sensible object within which is the Ding an sich. Ding an sich is half green and half red. Why? Because it's true that there is a Ding an sich. It's not true that it's unknowable. So Kant's concept of the Ding an sich is true and false. What do you think his successors said? Fichte, Schelling and the others, Hegel. They said, well, if I don't know the Ding an sich, how do I know that there is a Ding an sich? And if there isn't a Ding an sich, what's left? Just the appearances. So there's a world of appearances with no substance. Who sang about that? Nothing is real, nothing to get hung about.
Strawberry fields forever.
Well done. Right, well done, that's it. Yeah. When I was last in Liverpool, I made a little pilgrimage to the gate of Strawberry Fields, which it's an iron gate with a picture of lots of little iron strawberries all over it. It's a field close to where they lived, to where John Lennon lived.
Walton.
Yes. John Smith took me to see. I made a Beatles pilgrimage in order to see. Goodness gracious, they made a mark. I mean, there's nothing there, but they, by golly, they were wreckers. They were nothingers. They were nothing merchants. They evacuated a lot, but the people wanted to evacuate. They wanted to empty things out. They wanted nothing to be real, so that they could then fool around with homosexuality and everything else. And that's what's happened. So the Beatles were considerable wreckers. Be careful of music. Pay attention to what music you're listening to and what music your children listen to. Be careful. Don't allow the children to go to the other end of the house and make as much row as they like. You've got a big mansion and you can allow them to, you give them a hi-fi set which bombards the whole neighborhood. Don't do that. Control what music your children listen to, because music is important. It's very important. I remember when I was teaching in London, the boys, this was the it's ages ago, the late 1960s, when a boy used to come to school, enter the school at age 13, and his shirt was done up, his hair was tidy, his appearance was tidy. But very soon the shirt came undone and the tie was loosened. Then the shirt began to hang out of the trousers. Then the buttons of the jacket began to fly all over the place. And how did it all start? It started with his music. It's the music that began to dissolve the boy. And it just went on. It went on from there. Be careful of music. But both the devil and Almighty God use music. The church uses music with Gregorian music and polyphony. And the devil uses music with pop and rock. And the pop and rock dissolve human beings. And the bad music dissolves people. Plato would have censored strictly music in his Republic. There are kinds of music which he would ban. Recently, Putin in Russia, one would like to have shut down rap. He can't do it. He can't do it. He's not a tyrant. He's not a dictator. But from what he said, it's clear that if he could shut down rap, he would shut it down, because it's so it turns human beings into blobs. Contrast, how things used to be. But there used to be standards in Britain when it ran an empire. There were, people had some carriage, they had some dignity, they had some standards, they had some decency. In the 60s, the Brits were proud of breaking all that down. What can you do? So, the Ding an sich, the thing as it is in itself. The senses receive passively whatever is sensible of the material object, in other words, its phenomena. That's true. Kant allows for sensation. He allows for the validity of sensation, because he's going to monkey around with the mind. But then he says, for him, the intellect is active. He doesn't divide the intellect into active and passive. So the active intellect cannot open the sense packet. The mind can't get inside the sense packet. The mind can't get beyond the appearances of the object. It cannot get inside the object. It cannot read what's inside. The mind is crippled. The mind is handcuffed. The mind is tied hand and foot in Kant. It can't get behind the appearances. So it fabricates. Since it's tied hand and foot, it lies on its couch and it fabricates what the world is, or how the world is. And it puts behind the appearances what it wants. But it's not told by the object, by the intelligible objects. It's not told by the intellect is not told by the intelligible object what it is. The senses allow themselves still to be told by the sensible object what the appearances are. In Kant, the appearances are still valid. You can bet with his successors, with a few generations, the sensation won't be valid either. Well, what you've got today is a school of phenomenology, which means philosophers who've only still got the phenomena. They believe Kant, Kant is scripture now. Incredible, incredible. Such a violation of common sense. I repeat, the modern philosopher, he trusts his senses from morning until night, except when he's in his chair of philosophy teaching the poor students. Then he believes in his nonsense. And he teaches his nonsense because the parents of the students want nonsense. Because the parents of the students don't want the students coming home and telling them, the parents, that their way of life is rotten. So the parents want the corruption of the youth, which is why they get it in the schools. If the parents didn't want it, the schools wouldn't teach it. If the schools are teaching it, it's because the parents are accepting it. And the parents are quite happy, just as they don't want the virginity of their daughters, because mother will get a natural and instinctive and immediate reproach from the virginity of her daughter. As long as her daughter remains pure, she's reproaching mother who didn't live a pure life. She has had children, she's had a family, maybe she stayed with her husband, but she hasn't had much purity in her life. She gave away her virginity when she was, 14, 15 today at school. And she's fooled around from then onwards. She got enough old-fashioned sense to marry one husband and stay with him and have a family. Good for her. But when the little girls grow up little virgins, mother doesn't want them to stay virgins because the virgin will be a standing reproach to mother, which is why the schools wreck virginity. We're in trouble. The American expression is, we are deep in doo-doo. And some of you will know what doo-doo is. Most, if not all of you, know what doo-doo is. But that's for sure what we are deep into. If you don't know what doo-doo is, guess. And congratulations on your innocence and guess. The active intellect cannot open the sense packet. The ding and zik is unknowable. That's obviously, in the middle you have the mind confronts the packet. In Aristotle, the mind is capable of opening the packet. In Kant, it can't open the packet. Then we go on. The active intellect prowls all around the sense packet without getting inside. The active intellect is wholly unable to get behind the phenomena. That's the skepticism of Hume. The active intellect is in no way passive as to what the phenomena mean. The active intellect of Kant fabricates what the phenomena mean. It's quite independent of what the phenomena are, like a tree. In theory, in practice, the philosopher is never going to doubt that it's coffee on the breakfast table. He's never going to doubt that you put the key in the ignition. You put what looks like the key in what looks like the ignition, and then you what looks like turn the key, and then you hear what looks like the motor running, and then you drive to the university, and then you open what looks like the door, you go into the front, what looks like the front door of the university, you sit down on what looks like the chair of your professorship, and then you spout nonsense. And the kids are there because their parents have sent you to this university. And they've sent you to learn philosophy. Possibly the parents objected because with a grain still of common sense, they said, look, philosophy, you're not going to learn anything worthwhile. Oh, but Dad, I want to do philosophy. Philosophy is precious. All right, you do philosophy, but I tell you, you're going to hear nonsense. Then the kid, sure enough, Dad has still got enough sense to know that the philosophy is nonsense, but he still sends the boy to that university where he's going to learn nonsense. Wow. The active intellect is no way passive as to what the phenomena mean. The active intellect fabricates within itself what, in inverted commas, that's now a completely different meaning. The object, in inverted commas, because it's now a completely different meaning, is according to the will and its desires. Knowing is by will. And that's why you've got, in that little picture of Kant, you see that the mind, in inverted commas, has the arrows going to the object. The arrows are no longer going from the object to the mind. The arrows are going from the mind, in inverted commas, to the object, in inverted commas. The object is no longer the same. Everything in Kant is completely different. It's no longer God's creation and reality. It's my mind and man's fabrication. It's a total reversal. And so what you've got what Kant called, what he himself called the Copernican Revolution. The Copernican Revolution. Copernicus was the astronomer who said that the Earth goes round the sun and not the sun around the Earth. Copernican Revolution. So the Copernican Revolution means this. In the old days, the sun used to go round the Earth. Now, in Copernicus, the Earth goes round the sun. Okay? In Kant, applied to Kant, that means that in the old days, the mind used to go round the object, and the object was at the center. Now, the mind is at the center, and the object goes around. You know, there's all reality depends upon my mind. Incredible. What nonsense. How can anybody think such nonsense? But nothing is real. Nothing to get hung about. They've summed it up. The Beatles have summed it up. And a lot of the rock musicians, if you read their words, some of them are intelligent people. And Jim Morrison was more proud of his words than of his music. His music was simply a vehicle to carry his message. He knew the poets. He knew literature. He knew the foreign poets. He knew Baudelaire. He knew, but so they're not all stupid, the rock musicians. But they are singing of a terrible state of affairs. They make a lot of money singing of a terrible state of affairs. They don't have the answers, but they sure make a lot of money with the problem. And some of them do really get after the problem. And the problem is this. Nothing for real, nothing, and the immediate consequence, nothing to get hung about. Heterosexuality, homosexuality, why do you get hung about that? Abortion, why do you get hung about that? There's nothing to get hung about, because nothing is real. Nothing is real because Kant has turned it all into the mind. It's all just human fabrication. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But that's where we are. That's where we're at. And the church had to dig this up and dig it out. The church...
Just to say, when you talk about the 60s and the revolution, if you like, musically, and in terms of gets us to modernity today, and it also ties in with Vatican II, it's also, the other layer on top of that is LSD and drugs. Drugs,
yes.
At a mass level.
Yep.
Whereas,
drugs come into this because what's real? I mean, if you go higher, I've never had the honor of taking drugs, so I don't know I haven't experienced what it's like. But you move into a fantasy world, don't you? I mean, I don't expect anybody to admit here they take drugs, but I think that drugs are the means of access to the fantasy world, the lovely fantasy world in which corresponding to this.
The situation where, for example, the people within the State Department in America were actually planting huge quantities of LSD on campuses.
Yeah.
And people with a culture around that, what is it, turn on and switch off, and what was it, tune in.
Yep.
Ginsberg.
All get away from reality.
Yeah. So that whole set of things all happened at the same time.
Yeah. What's the answer? You've got to put all the boys back on the land. Get them with their feet in the doo-doo in the barn here. Get them looking after animals, because animals impose themselves. I can make a tractor do just what I want until it breaks down. I can't make a horse do just what I want. I've got to play with the horse. I mean, I've got to go along with the horse to quite an extent. There's a limit to what he can do, and if I treat him wrong, he's going to kick, and I could die of a horse kick. animals impose themselves. I can't tell what a cat's going to do. I can't tell what a dog's going to do. They have a little will of their own. They haven't got spirit. They aren't spiritual creatures, but they're not completely tied up in matter, totally tied up in matter, so to speak. They don't have free will. They're tied by their instincts, but I can't read their instincts. And therefore, I don't know what an animal's got to do. Therefore, I've got to allow for the animal doing this or that. But a tractor and all these machines, a computer will do exactly what it is. If I'm an expert in computers, I can make the computer dance on its head almost. It's extraordinary what I can make, what's fed into these, what the computers are made, a manufacturer capable of doing. And if I know what they can do, and I know how to make them do it, they have to obey me. So people have got, human beings, especially the young men, have got to be put back in situations where they are necessarily submitted to reality. The difficulty is, a classic example would be running a sailing ship, because the winds and the ocean, and if you get it wrong, you drown. So you've got to get it right. So you've got to play with the wind and the ocean. And that's a real reality. And you can't fabricate when you're... But the problem with sending boys on the sailing ships, it isn't real. It's artificial. And the boys know that. Whereas creating potatoes through the winter, creating potatoes through the season for the winter, the older boy knows that his little brother is going to starve if the older brother, doesn't get out early in the morning, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. The farm was obviously a discipline. Modern life, the suburbs are not a discipline. And the suburbs are everything dancing. It all comes. Milk comes out of packets. Spaghetti hangs on the trees. I mean, the suburbs are essentially detached from reality. And if you're born and bred in the suburbs, you're not going to have that automatic sense of reality which peasant boys have. I'm idealizing the peasant life, obviously, but it was in itself, the backward way of life is in itself a lot healthier than the modern way of life. I'll give you an example, one example, and then we're going to break off. I just had a tragic email from a father of 10 children whose wife has kicked him out. She's gone nuts. She's had 10 children. Probably the strain the strain must have been heavy. Maybe he didn't have enough understanding for her. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know him from Adam, and I don't know her from Eve. So I don't know what went on. But in any case, she's put him up in the law courts. She's thrown him out. She has said, if you abandon this trad cult, this traditional Catholic cult, if you abandon that, then I will allow you to live in the basement, so long as you make a promise not to interfere with the education of the children. There are still 7 children at home. 3 children now adults and out in the big bad world. The eldest is with his dad. I think the other 2, their second, I forget something, it says something. The third, I'm not sure. I think 1 and 3 are with dad. But he's not allowed to contact his children, his other children, in any way. And they have, they were with dad. So mum has brought in therapists to switch the children from the trad life inculcated by dad, taught by dad, to the mod life, which has the approval of her parish priest, her novice order parish priest, the approval of her family, and so on and so on, all of whom are telling her that she's quite right, obviously, to have thrown him out, and he can't get at his children. Tragic. And that's the suburbs for you. Because Dr. White, my good friend in the United States, thinks that it's the loneliness of such mothers that has a lot to do with it. I don't think that's the whole story. I think it's the whole story is she possibly was born and bred possibly went through a modern university. She absorbed all the poison of vegetable at the kitchen sink, barefoot and pregnant, and all of that. That poison she took in. Then after university, she met her husband. She fell in love with him. And he led her into tradition, and she followed, She followed for 10 children, but then every time she went to the supermarket, everybody mocked her. Can't you stop breeding like a rabbit? What's the problem? What's your problem? All the other suburban mothers say that to him. What can the poor guy do? The poor mother is pressure upon the poor mother. I don't know what happened, but I suspect that's probably what happened. And he says she's lonely. She's not got enough real other mothers to talk to. She needs other real mothers. And Dr. White says in his experience, and he's experiencing many such cases in the United States today. He's got one after another of these mothers collapses and can't take the weight of the trad cat life and give up. And then they turn on their husbands. And with all the force of a woman's will, because women have stronger wills than men, she throws him out. What can he do? Because the courts all back the mum. There's no way in which the courts are going to back dad. It's suicide for a nation. Such disintegration, such almost planned disintegration. There are people that want this. The Jews and the Freemasons want this. They want to break down the Western nations. They want to break down the morals and the standards and the life of the white males. They hate the white males most because the white males were responsible for this way of life. They built it up, led by the church, led by the Catholic faith. The Jews got into through Freemasonry, they got into the church big time with Vatican II. The church is broken down. What is there still to defend and protect the white Catholic male? And so the males have collapsed. And then the blacks turn on the whites because the whites are no longer defending what they should be defending, standing for what they should be standing for. The women turn on the men because the men are no longer standing for what they should be standing for. And there's another one, So hence this tremendous hatred of the whites, scorn of whites, and the scorn of the Jews turned on the Gentiles. There was a time when the Gentiles had the Jews under control and for their own good kept them in ghettos or helped them to look after themselves, because the Jews wanted the ghettos, not the Jews wanted the ghettos because they wanted to be on their own. Okay, said the whites at that time, you live in your ghettos and you stay in your ghettos, and we will oblige you to listen to a sermon on Sunday. That's the Jews in Rome. They were obliged. They had to send representatives to listen to a Catholic sermon. The whites oppressed the Jews for their own good. Now the Jews are oppressing everybody for their own triumph. But their own triumph will be their hell, obviously. Let's break off.